air in the lawyer's office was stale, smelling of old paper and lukewarm coffee. Elara sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, a small gray mouse between her two siblings. To her right, Julian tapped his polished Italian leather shoe against the carpet, checking his watch. To her left, Chloe scrolled through her phone, her thumb a blur, her face illuminated by the bright screen. They were here for the reading of Great-Aunt Seraphina's will. A woman none of them had truly known, except for Elara. Elara had spent her Saturdays at the old mansion, not for a sense of duty, but out of genuine fascination. She'd helped the eccentric, sharp-witted old woman catalog the thousands of books that filled the house, listening to stories of art, history, and the city's forgotten past. Julian and Chloe had always scoffed. "Why waste your time with that old recluse in her dusty tomb?" Julian would say. "It's just sad," Chloe would add, before posting a photo of her designer brunch. Mr. Abernathy, the lawyer, cleared his throat. "We'll begin. Seraphina Vance was of sound mind, etc., etc. Let's move to the bequests." He looked at Julian. "To my grandnephew, Julian Vance, in recognition of his understanding of modern value, I leave my complete stock and investment portfolio, managed by Vanguard." Julian permitted himself a small, satisfied smile. He knew Seraphina had been quietly wealthy. This was, he assumed, the bulk of the estate. "To my grandniece, Chloe Vance," Abernathy continued, "in recognition of her appreciation for beauty, I leave my entire collection of art and fine jewelry as itemized in the attached appendix." Chloe gasped, finally looking up from her phone. "Oh my God," she whispered, already imagining the appraisals. Abernathy adjusted his glasses and looked at Elara with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. It looked almost like pity. "And finally, to my grandniece, Elara Vance, who shared my love for the stories held within, I leave the entirety of my property at 451 Crestwood Drive, including the house, the land, and all contents therein." The room was silent. Julian's smile froze, then slowly turned into a smirk. Chloe's face wrinkled in confusion, then sympathy. "The house?" Chloe said, her voice dripping with pity. "Elara, that place it's a teardown. The property taxes alone will bankrupt you, and all that junk." "A brilliant move, Auntie," Julian chuckled, standing up and buttoning his suit jacket. "A parting lesson in fiscal responsibility. She's left you a debt, Elara, not an inheritance." He patted her on the shoulder. "Well, good luck. Chloe and I have to, well, you understand. We have assets to manage." They left. Elara sat alone in the office before Mr. Abernathy handed her a single, ornate skeleton key. "She said you'd know what to do with it, my dear. Good luck." The next day, Elara stood in the grand, silent foyer of the mansion. It was dusty, yes, it was cluttered, but to her it was beautiful. It was a lifetime of knowledge. She wasn't burdened, she was home. She began the work she and her aunt had always loved, cataloging. She didn't call a junk removal service. She went room by room, book by book. Weeks turned into a month. She lost herself in the work, the smell of old paper and beeswax becoming her new reality. It was in Seraphina's private study, a room Elara had rarely entered, that she found it. Tucked behind a row of leather-bound philosophy texts was an old, wooden writing desk. The key Mr. Abernathy had given her didn't fit the main drawer. It fit a small, almost invisible lock on the side panel. Click. A hidden compartment sprang open. Inside there was no cash, no gold, just a small leather-bound journal, its pages filled with a coded cipher Elara recognized instantly. It was a substitution cipher they had used as a game when she was a child. She spent the night translating. It wasn't a diary. It was a set of instructions. The city's heart is not in its vault, but in its foundation, one entry read. It led her to a specific, unassuming history book in the main library, a book Elara herself had shelved a dozen times. Following the journal's reference, she counted to the 84th page. There, a small section was neatly cut out, revealing a second, smaller key. The journal pointed her to the grand built-in bookcase against the far wall. Behind a sliding panel disguised as carved oak, she found a small, modern, fireproof safe. Her hands trembled as she inserted the key. Inside, again, no jewels, just a thick, canvas-wrapped parcel. She unrolled it on the floor. It contained a set of original 19th century city blueprints, brittle with age. With them were 5 deeds for small, seemingly random plots of land. A narrow strip downtown, an overgrown patch by the old rail yard, a forgotten lot in the industrial quarter, worthless, all of them. Except, she compared the deeds to the ancient blueprints. They all sat along a single, faint line marked Municipal Utility and Transit Corridor, Reserved. Abernathy's voice was shaky on the phone the next day. Elara, I've spoken to a historian. Those blueprints, they are the only known copies of the original city founders' transit plan. A plan the city just voted to revitalize with a new high-speed rail line. The announcement isn't even public yet. He paused. Elara, the city needs that land. They can't build the line without it. Those worthless plots, they aren't just valuable. They're essential. They're priceless. That same week, the news broke. EtherTech, the darling of the tech world and the core of Julian's new portfolio, was a massive fraud, a house of cards built on fake projections. The stock evaporated overnight, worthless. A distraught Chloe called Elara 2 days later, weeping. She had taken the priceless art collection to a top appraiser at Sotheby's. The appraiser had smiled kindly. These are exquisite, my dear. But they're forgeries, famous ones. Your aunt, as a former art historian, seems to have collected them as a teaching tool. They are worth nothing. 3 weeks later, Elara sat in the mansion's study, now clean, the wood polished and glowing. The blueprints were safely in a climate-controlled vault, and the city's offer was beyond staggering. The doorbell rang. It was Julian and Chloe. They looked smaller, their expensive clothes seeming to hang off them. Elara, Julian began, his voice quiet, all the arrogance gone. We were wrong. Chloe just looked at the floor, her face pale. Elara poured them tea. She left you what you valued, Elara said softly, not in triumph, but in understanding. Julian, you valued the idea of wealth. Chloe, you valued the appearance of beauty. She knew those things were hollow. She looked at them. She left me what I valued. A story, a puzzle, and this house. She pushed 2 envelopes across the desk. The city has acquired the land. I'm endowing this house to the city as a public library and historical archive. The Seraphina Vance Foundation. They opened the envelopes. They were employment contracts. I need a director of finance and a curator for the collection, Elara said. It's real work. It's not glamorous, but it's real. Julian looked at the contract, then at Elara, his eyes shining for the first time with something other than ambition. He nodded, unable to speak. Elara stood and looked out the window at the city her great-aunt had, in her own quiet way, owned all along. She finally understood. The real inheritance wasn't the money. It was the wisdom to know what was truly priceless.